Okay. It's okay. I've got a couple. I pulled a couple other things.
Awesome.
Good morning again. My name is Mike Kim, and I'm the rector here at All Saints Church, and welcome to our Sunday morning forum. I want to kind of do a content note just at the beginning of this. We're going to be having a really important and difficult conversation this morning about something that we don't talk enough about, and that is suicide. Suicide is something that I firmly believe has touched and touches every single one of us. All of us either know someone who has taken their own life, someone who has attempted to take their own life, or someone who is considering or has considered, and that person might be you. So this has touched all of us, and because it is something that touches all of us so deeply, this might be something that you are up for having a conversation about, and it might be something that you're not. So we want to please know that this will be recorded. It is being recorded. It will be posted back on our website and on social media, so you can always come back and watch it later if it gets too hard. And I hope you are able to stay with us. I want to say that we have a whole bunch of resources that we want to share with you. Some of the ones here at All Saints Church we're going to be talking a lot about grief. We have a wonderful grief ministry. Ana Camacho is the person who is coordinating that right now. And you can reach her here at the church. And we're going to say these numbers several times, and they're on our website at 626-583-2737 is for our grief ministry. We also have a wonderful group of lay counselors, and they can be reached at 626-583-2706. And also, you're going to be a big part of this conversation that we're having this morning as well. If you want to text in your own questions, we'll get them right here, or also your own experiences. And that number, and we will give this several times, is 910-TEXT-ASC, 910-839-8272. One more time, 910-839-8272. I am so honored to have here with me and have us together in the forum this morning Charlotte Maya. Charlotte is a parishioner here at All Saints Church with your husband Tim. You are an author, and this is the memoir, a manuscript that you have, and I was honored to be one of your readers. And it's called Sushi Tuesday, and it's also a website that you have of the same name, and the website is Charlotte Maya. Is it charlotte-maya.com?
Yes, it is.
Yep. And your writing explores the intersections of grief, parenting, and self-care, particularly within the context of suicide. Your work has been highlighted on The Mighty and been featured on the A2A Alliance and the Your Next Chapter podcast with Angela Raspass. And so it's always great having you here. You're here a lot, but just thank you so much. And I know when you let me read this manuscript and we talked afterwards, one of the things that I said is, I wish that I had had this to read 30 years ago, and at minimum this should be required reading in every seminary. And it is, it's just so honest, and just thank you for being here and having this conversation. Can you just kind of talk about really sort of what happened, and then also what led you to write this memoir and really kind of start this conversation?
Well, thank you so much for having me here. It's a real honor to be here. And thank you for having this conversation about suicide. Churches are often very silent in this specific area of grief. And so I just am really grateful that you are opening up the conversation around suicide, because it is a very hard word to say out loud.
Yep.
I will start by telling you that if you had told me 15 years ago that I would be here talking about suicide, I would have asked you what you were smoking, and you should really share.
Yep.
This was really not anything that I thought was going to be on my radar, and certainly not speaking about it in any public way.
Yeah.
So 15 years ago, I was happily married. I had 2 little boys. They were 6 and 8. We had a white picket fence and a designer dog. I mean, it was everything that I thought my life could possibly be. And in October of 2007, I had taken my kids on a hike, and my husband had stayed home because he was tired. And, you know, Saturdays, we are tired and we take naps. And by the time I got home with the kids and the dog, there was a police car parked in front of my house. And when I pulled into the driveway, there's a policeman, a policewoman, and a priest standing in my driveway. And that moment changed everything. I just kept staring at that clerical collar, thinking this is not going to be good news.
Right.
Sam was Jewish.
Right.
I knew it was going to be really bad news.
That's right. Yeah.
And the policeman and the policewoman stayed with my kids in the car. And the policeman and the priest took me inside to my own house, asked me to sit down, which of course I didn't want to do, because maybe if I didn't sit down, they wouldn't tell me whatever this terrible thing was that they were about to say. And eventually I sat, and they told me the truth, that Sam had taken his life, and they told me that they would tell my children how their father died, but that I would have to tell the children how. And that is the hardest thing I have ever done. And I am grateful that they told me to tell the truth. They said, we recommend that you tell the kids the truth because you do not want them finding out from somebody else. And at a time when nothing made sense about what was happening, that made sense to me. And that honesty has been a real foundation for how I have been able to move forward on this path. And so my children have always known that they could count on me for an honest answer to very hard questions. And sometimes the answer is, I don't know. And that's a real answer. But the honest answer, it's hard to deal with. Suicide is a terrible word. How do you explain suicide to a 6-year-old?
I know.
It's horrific. Or an 8-year-old. Or really a 39-year-old.
Right.
And it's the first step in moving forward, that honesty.
So and I mean, the book literally begins with that day, and it's you say, if Sam, if he had only taken a nap, it all would have gone very differently. And one of the many things I appreciate about the book is you walk us through in such great detail your experience without expecting that your experience is normative but just sort of like, this is what happened to me, and just opening up. And to me, that's the model of Christ, is just this vulnerability of just sort of laying yourself out there in love and trusting that there's going to be something healing with that. And so sort of two things. What led you to write about this? And then also, it's like one of the things we know about trauma is telling the story is healing, and telling the story is re-traumatizing, as I'm sure just even having this conversation is. So what was that experience like?
Well, I was very honest with the experience from the beginning. I was just very straightforward with my friends and my family about what had happened to Sam, why I didn't know why he had done what he had done. So honesty was always part of my process, and I was just very transparent. And people kept telling me, Charlotte, thank you for being honest. It makes a difference to be able to have these conversations. It creates a community. You're not alone in that space. I tried not to write this book for a long time. I feel like therapy and writing the book are two different things. So I did a lot of therapy, so much therapy that my therapist asked me to do double sessions for a long time.
Yeah, good.
And so for me, while the writing can be therapeutic, the memoir is really a matter of craft and not therapy. And that's why it's been almost 15 years now since Sam's suicide, because I do think it takes time to process and to get some perspective and to kind of learn to live with the new reality. So I took that time, I did that healing work. I was open to talking to people and sharing my story, and I am always amazed at how many people want to have the conversation, because while it is difficult, it is also, as you said, universal. I mean, you cannot go a week in this country without reading about somebody's suicide. I have been to too many funerals for young victims of suicide or older victims of suicide. It's the 10th leading cause of death in this country. And so I tried not to write the book, but I felt like at some point the book really just wanted me to write it, if that doesn't sound too woo-woo. I mean, you're a priest, so.
I believe in that. So I'm all for the woo-woo. That's great. Yeah. So, there's so many directions to go on this. It's like, even you said, like, I was thinking about my own sort of history with suicide, and actually, like, when I think about the earliest moment where I encountered that, I can actually be fairly sure that probably wasn't. It's just the earliest that I knew of, because I probably had friends and other people who were struggling with it that I knew that I never knew.
Right.
For me, I remember when I was a junior in high school, someone who was younger than me in my school, 1 year younger, took his own life, and I went to the funeral and actually accompanied one of his friends, and I remember by the time I went to college, I like sat and counted 9 people that I knew who had made an attempt. Yeah. And that's, and since I've done funerals, and things like that, and just had, people very, very close to me struggling with this. So you said we don't talk about it, and it feels like one of the other things that sort of related to it that we don't talk about enough is depression, is mental illness, is that struggle that, so like, why didn't I know that these people were struggling? And like about a week and a half ago, I started taking Lexapro for anxiety and depression, because I need a little help right now. I'm in therapy, I'm doing all that stuff. And so I take 2 medicines in the morning. I take a blood pressure medicine and I take Lexapro. And I was talking with Robin, with my wife, about it, and we were talking about this, and this is actually something she noted. She said, yeah, you take 2 medicines, and one of those is okay and one of those is not.
One we talk about and one we don't.
And one we don't. And it just is, and they're from probably the same stress and life circumstances are causing both.
Right.
And so
well, they're
I take
all connected.
Right, and so I take 2 medicines for that, and one we talk about. I can say, oh yeah, I'm on blood pressure medicine. Oh, that's great. In fact, that even is sort of, in this messed up world we have, almost like a badge of honor. It's like, oh yeah, you must be working really hard, you're on blood pressure medicine. But that, like, oh no, I'm taking something for anxiety and depression.
Right.
It's like, oh, we don't talk about that. And so, but then that's also like, so a couple things to, like, first of all, any thoughts on that? But secondly, like, part of what you talk about is like, you didn't know that Sam was struggling to that degree.
I didn't know that he was struggling to that degree. I can look in retrospect and see signs differently. He had a lot of job stress, but if you have a job, you have a lot of job stress. And if you don't have a job, then you really have a lot of job stress. So what is normal and what is not normal?
Right.
For the first 3 days after Sam's death, I did not sleep at all. And on the 3rd night, the doorbell rang, and it was one of my friends who's a medical doctor with a prescription for Xanax with my name on it. And it was the first time I had slept in 3 days. I still woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, but 4 hours of sleep over 4 days starts to make life seem a little bit more manageable than it had seemed 24 hours before. So I am a big proponent of getting all the team on board, the medical team, the therapist, the priest, although, to be fair, I couldn't look at that clerical collar without shaking and bursting into tears for probably a decade. Policemen, same thing. Everybody has a gift to bring. That is one of the things that I learned. One of the things, I was very open to receiving help because I was a puddle. I didn't know, I couldn't find the end of the thread to start to weave my life back together again. And so when my doctor friend showed up on the front porch with Xanax, I said, yes, please, and thank you. And when people showed up with food, I said, yes, please, and thank you. And I had one friend who was a seamstress, and the night that one of my kids shredded his favorite blanket into shards, she offered to sew it back together. So I do believe that everyone has a gift to bring, and people often ask, what can I do? And everyone has their own gift. Think about your own gifts. What are the things you can do? You might not be a chef. That's okay. There will be plenty of lasagnas. There will be so many lasagnas that your 8-year-old will say, I never want to eat lasagna again, Mommy. But you have another gift. Maybe you're a gardener. Maybe I had a friend, you and I have talked about this, but I had a friend who went to her church's temple to pray. I was really very angry at God. I figured out later God was really a safe place for my anger, but at the time I didn't know it. And I told God to take her own flying leap. She could make a house call. I was not going to darken her door. But if God wanted to come to me, God could come to me. And God came to me in the form of this friend who asked for my prayers. And I said, that's convenient because I am not talking to God right now. But if you would like to talk to God, here are some of the things you can talk to him about. Everybody has a gift. It doesn't have to be expensive. It's whatever is in their own hearts. And when you are in the throes of grief and you can't sleep and you can't eat and the kids are the only reasons you get up in the morning, whatever you feel drawn to bring to that person is a gift.
That's just great advice, not just for suicide, but for grief and struggle anyway. I love one of the devices, and I want to get to the theological piece in a second. The device you use in your manuscript, in your book about this, is you talk about the Janes. And first of all, I thought it was brilliant because it's like, okay, then you don't have to worry about leaving anybody out or naming someone who didn't want to be named. But what really struck me is there was almost this dichotomy. And you talk about, first of all, there were so many of the Janes, and so many people offered gifts that were wonderful. And I mean, I love, sometimes Jesus be a Xanax, and that's great. But you tell the story of like that next Monday, and you drop your kids off at school, and you talk about being outside the school, and you say, most of the parents ignored me, giving the boys and me a wide berth. Several avoided eye contact and kept their distance. Some glanced in our direction and looked quickly away. Suicide stigma already separated us from them. The friends in my home the day before were heartbroken along with me, but out in public, I had no reason to expect understanding, let alone empathy. I would be ostracized because of how Sam died. Can you talk a little about the stigma and the ostracization
I
of that?
was terrified that I would be ostracized.
Yeah.
People don't like to talk about suicide, and the wife is the biggest reason, right, that somebody might jump off a building. That's what I felt.
That's what you thought, right?
Is what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
How internalized that guilt and shame is almost immediately. That if he died, it's my fault.
Yeah.
It's different than
Cancer.
Yeah. If he died from cancer, it isn't so much my fault.
Right.
And we talk about cancer survivors, and those are the souls who have struggled themselves with cancer and are, for the moment, at least cancer-free or in remission. The term suicide survivor refers to those of us who are left.
Yeah.
It's a very confusing term, but even in just the limits of language, how we talk about these things impacts how we experience them. So I am a suicide survivor, meaning that I survived my husband's suicide, which feels like a level of complicity that we don't necessarily have in other diseases.
Yeah.
And it makes it very hard to say out loud. And so from the passage, Sam died on a Saturday. On Sunday, my house was full of people. That was probably the day I stopped locking my door for the foreseeable future, because people just came, and I opened the door to them, which for me really was very helpful. And Monday I brought the kids to school, and I know that might sound controversial. I'm not saying it was the best thing to do. I'm saying that is what I did. And
you also told them to call if it got too much, and you'd pick them up.
Totally.
Yeah.
I feel like, and the research does bear this, that young children need a sense of structure and normalcy.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, let's go. It's Monday.
Right.
Let's go to school. We walked to school. I said, call me if at any time it gets too much. The principal knew, the teachers knew. And so I took the kids to school. I will never forget the face of my poor third grader's teacher. I think it was only maybe her second year teaching. And she did not know what to do. Her heart was just breaking. And here was this little 8-year-old, and now she has 25 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
And this huge moment. So I did take the kids to school, and they both stayed in school all day that day. And when I left them at their respective classrooms and started to walk back home, that was when I was just swarmed by, I can't even tell you who all it was. It was just like hug after hug after hug. I just stood on the front lawn, and people came to me and embraced me. And yes, I know there were people who were very uncomfortable.
Right.
And I know there were people who were very upset with me for having told my children the truth, because my kids would come home from school and tell me these crazy crazy stories they heard on the playground about how their own father died because the idea of his own suicide was so unpalatable. And believe me, I didn't want to tell my 6-year-old about suicide either.
No.
So I know that it was a very difficult thing for other people's 6-year-olds to hear. But that was why it was so important that my kids knew they could come home and know the honest truth about what happened with their own father.
I want to jump back to that piece of the internalized guilt, because we talk about all the time here at All Saints Church, the healing power of love, and love heals everybody. And the truth is sometimes love isn't enough.
Yes.
And then there's the, your mind just like, oh, if only I had. Can you talk about your wrestling with all of that?
Well, there's a lot to wrestle with.
Yeah.
I feel like that's why it took 300 pages to manage. What I finally came to is, my therapist would say to me over and over again, Charlotte, you get 100% of your 50%. So what she meant by that is, every relationship, I had my 50%, Sam had his 50%.
Right.
I don't know what would have happened if he had taken a nap that day and we had continued. Would we have lived happily ever after? Would we have celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary this year? I don't know. Living with the not knowing is really, for me, the biggest part of the wrestling. I knew that Sam had back pain, debilitating back pain from the time he was young, 13 years old. I knew I had different pieces to the puzzle. I knew he had job stress. I knew he was worried about finances. I knew that he had debilitating back pain. As I started to grapple with the reality of his death, there were all kinds of things that I realized I didn't know. And it is very hard to have that conversation when one of you is gone.
Right.
So there were a lot of just really late nights, a lot of conversations with friends, a lot of conversations with family. I'm still learning things about Sam that I didn't necessarily know. We were married for 15 years and together for 17 years, but it still takes a lifetime to know other people.
Yeah.
I think just that's one of the hardest things about suicide is Sam didn't talk about his struggles beforehand. So part of Sam hadn't been seeing a therapist. He wasn't on medication. He wasn't diagnosed with anything. It was as if he had jumped out of the clear blue sky. And so for me, that was what I had to navigate, is how is this man that I have known and loved for so long, how could I not have known him?
Yeah.
And those are not easy questions to grapple with.
Yeah. I want to, first of all, thank you. This is so beautiful and you're so courageous, and just this is so healing to have you talk about this, and it feels like we're just opening this thing up. That I know that I've met with people in my office who have shared things like this, and it feels like these are conversations that are only happening behind closed doors, and they so need to happen out in the open. And just deeply grateful for you. And really, for all of you who want to participate in this, you can text in any questions. 910 text ASC 910. Where's my camera? There's my camera. 910 text ASC 910 839-2706. Also want to give out the number for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. That's 800-273-8255. 800-273, I believe that's 273-TALK, 273-8255. Or you can just text the word home to 741-741. Just text the word home to 741-741. Also, you can go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org for a live chat, suicidepreventionlifeline.org. And this is going to lead into sort of the theology piece, but some of the things you've talked about a little and you also write about is the anger and also the feeling of betrayal. And the person that you're, first of all, it's dealing with, how do you love someone and grieve them and be angry and feel betrayed at the same time? And also, they're not there for you to vent that emotion about. And you write really powerfully about that. Can you talk a little about those emotions?
Well, it is complicated because the person that you love and you grieve and you miss is also the person who really has pissed you off.
Yeah.
Like, you couldn't talk to me. I'm your wife.
Yeah.
Watching the children suffer. Like, if you're going to mess with me, fine. I can take it. I'm a big girl, but don't mess with the mama bear.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Don't mess with the kids. If you had to leave me, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
Go. It's okay. I'm a big girl. I can take it. But don't leave the children.
Yeah.
How dare you? Which is also then why I knew he had to have been ill.
Right.
You've had little kids. Chase has little kids.
Yeah.
What would it take for you to leave?
Yeah.
It's not, I don't believe it's a conscious choice. It is a disease that is just as insidious as an undiagnosed cancer or a sudden heart attack, but it just looks so much uglier from the outside. And we blame the person, the victim of suicide, for an action that is really not a choice. And so that was the circle I kept coming back to, is I know my husband loved me.
Yeah.
I know he loved those kids. He left a note that said, I love you, I'm sorry. And as my 6-year-old pointed out, how come he was well enough to say, I love you and I'm sorry, and not well enough not to jump?
Yeah.
And those two things don't make sense.
Yeah.
And it's coming to terms with the pieces that don't fit together. That is really the work of grieving in this space. Because it is complicated. All grief is complicated.
Yeah.
But suicide has this very, I don't even know the word for it. It's complicated to tease out the pieces in a way that you can live with. But that's the work, right?
Yeah.
To name it, to feel how awful it is, to adjust to the fact that it is, and then to integrate it into what will be. It's never done. But to find a way to hold that part, the love part, really, to hold the love and to move forward. That's the work.
You talk about, and I know you brought up a piece of the manuscript to read.
A short chapter?
A short chapter, yeah. And you talk about your relationship with God. And you mentioned it before when you said God and I aren't on speaking terms. Could you sort of set that up and read that piece? Because I thought that was just so profound about what happened spiritually with you.
Well, I had always been a very religious girl. I grew up in a home where we went to church religiously, twice a week.
Yep.
And God had always been a source of comfort and strength. And after Sam's death, I was really angry. I was angry at Sam, and I was really angry at God. I was a lot angrier at God because I couldn't understand how this could possibly happen. And as you and I have discussed, there are some unfortunate theologies and just things that people say that aren't very helpful.
Right.
And so immediately after Sam's death, I stopped talking to God. I didn't pray. I had no intention of ever setting foot in a religious space of any kind ever again. Like, I did not need that kind of God.
Yeah.
So this is a chapter that takes place about maybe 2 months after Sam's death. So by the time my parents lived with me for almost 6 weeks. So by this point, my parents had gone back to their home. It was just me and the kids. It's the mommy channel 24/7, which is not really very fun for anyone.
Yeah.
And, trying to just kind of put one foot in front of the other. So this chapter is called Names Will Be Taken in Vain. In the weeks after Sam died, my friend Karen politely described my faith as having been challenged. The truth is that I had told God to take her own flying leap at least a dozen times. I felt abandoned by God. Clearly, God abandoned Sam and my sons. This was part of God's plan. To push a loving, devoted father and husband off a building? To deprive my boys of their favorite baseball coach? I wasn't interested in this kind of plan or that kind of God. Another friend, one whose faith was still intact, gave me a book of 365 quotes. Some were truly inspirational, and others went like this. God can take tragedy and turn it into triumph. He routinely does this for those who love him. For those who love him? What about those of us who were enraged by him? Now that would be a God I could respect. But this God who conditioned his care upon my love for him, this is why I had a dog. Danny, my older son, had thrown a major fit one night because I wouldn't let him watch television before completing his homework. Why he flew into a rage about this, I wasn't entirely sure, because the family rule had always been homework first, then TV. But as I stepped back, I realized I knew exactly why he was mad. It wasn't about the homework. He was hurt and furious because his daddy jumped to his death, leaving my son without a loving father, without faith in the strongest man he knew, without a catcher to pitch to, without his personal morning alarm clock. So I let him rage. He hit and kicked. He shredded the geometry project he had worked on for 3 days. He destroyed his brother's art project. He turned the hose on me. I stayed with him as best I could, protecting him, his little brother, and me, recognizing and understanding his anger, but also terrified of it. When I called the therapist in a panic, Danny followed me around the house, first like a crazed stalker, and eventually like a puppy dog. By the end of the 30-minute telephone conversation, this grief-stricken boy wrapped his arms around me in a hug. By the end of the evening, both boys were fed, baths had been drawn, and books read. The homework was even completed. I had called yet another friend and asked her to read all the geometry vocabulary from her son's homework, and then my blue-eyed boy looked up all the definitions again. He dictated, I typed, and it was done. Lastly, I sent an email to his teacher explaining that Danny had to do the entire project all over again because our dog had shredded it. My dog provided unconditional love and a plausible alibi. I did not need a God who was less compassionate than I was. I had loved God, and tragedy happened anyway. Now, a God who would let me rant and rage and still love me, that would be a God I could respect, but not the one who needed me to love her first.
Can you talk a little about, first of all, thank you, that was beautiful. And actually one of the things that jumps out at me as I hear you read that is that you provided for your son the God that you were craving yourself, is you
Yes.
created that safe space. Your love for him, and this is us as parents, it's not conditional on this.
Right.
And you provided that space where he could he turned the hose on you. I mean, where he could just rage and destroy, and you never let him hurt himself.
Right.
And so you
Your
provided,
boundaries.
right, you actually held that space for him so that he could rage, and you were so conscious that you were not being presented with a God who would do the same thing for you. And so can you sort of talk about, from that point, what has your journey been like? I mean, because you're inside a church talking to a guy in a collar. So, yeah.
I've learned, I needed a God who had higher standards than I do, right?
Right.
If God is not at least, I'm a pretty compassionate parent,
Uh-huh.
and I need a God who's even more compassionate
Right.
than I am. And I think it's just continuing to wrestle with with my own concept of God.
Mm-hmm.
On the first anniversary of Sam's death, one of my very dear friends, somebody I'd known since junior high, invited me to go to church with her. And the way she issued the invitation was so open and lovely. She said, I'd love for you to, I know Sam's first death anniversary, we called it. His first death anniversary is coming up, and I would love for you to come to church with me and my family, and then we can go to lunch. And she said, and I also understand, Charlotte, that church might be the last place on earth you want to be.
Yeah.
And so the way she opened the invitation, it was so beautiful, and I knew that whether I said yes or whether I said no, our friendship was still intact.
Right.
And as soon as she issued the invitation, I said, I knew that's where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And the preacher, the sermon that day, the priest was talking about having lost his own son to cancer at a very young age, that he was a child, and how angry he was at God.
Wow.
And he was a minister,
Yeah.
and he was angry, and he would wail and yell and clench his fists. And I sat in the back of the church weeping and thinking, this is a man who knows how much pain
Right.
I am in.
Right.
And the readings that day were about Jacob wrestling with the angel. And one of the things that the pastor said was that he realized that God is about a relationship. And that as long as he was still angry with God, he was still in relationship with God. Yeah. And I sat in the back, and this light bulb went off. All those names, all those times I had been calling God names, all God hears is Charlotte calling.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Right? And all those things the kids say, Mom, I wish you had died instead of Daddy. It's not that they wished I had died instead of Daddy. It's that they're in so much pain, they need me to hear how much pain they're in.
Yeah.
And I learned that God is big enough to hear that pain and still love me. That is love with a capital L. I don't have to be perfect. I don't even have to be that good. I just have to show up. Just the fact that I am is enough. That is a God I can have a relationship with.
Oh, preach that. That's, yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. And then you think about, okay, so that's also how we can be with each other, and that's how, that's also how you can have this conversation and tell this story.
Totally. Well, and people say things like, okay, this is one of my least favorite.
Okay.
He's in a better place.
Oh, man.
So I appreciate why that might be comforting for some people, but when my 6-year-old hears that Daddy is in a better place, and then my 6-year-old, and 6-year-olds aren't that big, they are little people,
Right.
but they're very smart.
Yep.
And my 6-year-old says to me, Mommy, if Daddy is in a better place, shouldn't we go too?
Right.
No,
Right.
we don't.
Right.
We're not going there.
Right.
Right? How do you
Yeah.
manage both
Yeah.
of those
Yeah.
things? So this is where the theology
Yeah.
around, it doesn't always land with suicide in
No.
the same way that it does with other things. God's plan? No, thank you.
No.
God
No.
planned this?
Mm-mm.
I don't think he did.
Mm-mm.
Or if he did, maybe he should hand the reins over to me, because I think I could do a
Right.
lot better planning.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. And I was talking with someone this week whose former wife had taken her life. And while they were married, one of the things that she had said was that the only reason that she wasn't going to take her life was because she was convinced she was going to go to hell. And so, but he was in this sort of bind because he absolutely didn't believe in that theology. At the second time, he said, if this is actually preventing her from doing this,
Right.
and that's a whole other thing, is living with someone who is suicidal, is sort of like, okay, what can I, and you didn't have that opportunity because you didn't know, and you had to do it sort of all in retrospect of like, could I have done something? And then there's all these people who are out there living with people who are suicidal, who are like, okay, what can I do or what shouldn't I do? And it's, then you get a situation, I was thinking, it's like, well, yeah, there's that hugely toxic theology, which if you play it out, it's like, oh, I not only lost my dad, now he's in hell, which is just like, that's not a God I'm interested in at all. And yet it was just that there's that sort of desperation to it.
Yes.
And so, and to me, it's also sort of like, okay, the silence around this becomes the environment in which the toxicity thrives.
Right.
And around mental illness and around suicide. It is just this sort of silence about this, and that people feel alone. Yeah.
It's the isolation that
Yeah.
is so sad to me.
Yeah.
And I think that is why the conversations are so important.
Yeah.
There are people who want to be present with somebody who is suffering. And if the first person you ask for help can't be there for you
Right.
in whatever capacity you need them, keep asking, which is hard. And so that's why the rest of us need to be attentive and available and open when we can. It's a very slippery space. My cousin was 33 years old when she died from cancer. And she was surrounded by offers for carpool and people who would water her plants and take her son to school or wherever, and lasagna. And when Sam was suffering, he suffered alone.
Yeah.
He didn't have medication. He didn't have a therapist. He didn't have people showing up. And I know that they would have.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so when we create a safer space to have those conversations, both for the people who are suffering from the suicidal grip, and for those of us who have lost someone beloved in this specific way, to have those conversations with heart and dark chocolate, sense of humor.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also sort of a good, again, time to remind us, like, if this is something you're struggling with, if you are struggling with intrusive thoughts of taking your own life or of harming yourself, if you're living with someone or know someone who is, you don't have to be alone. And first of all, you can contact any of us here at All Saints Church. Want to give you some of those numbers again. Our grief group, if you are a survivor of suicide or you're just dealing with any grief in your life, contact Ana Camacho here at All Saints. That number is 626-583-2737. We're going to keep giving these out. We have amazing lay counselors. That number is 626-583-2706, 583-2706. And again, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-TALK. Had this text come in. And if you want to text a question or a thought in, it's 910-TEXT-ASC, 910-839-8272. My son took his own life at age 38 last year. Did you struggle breathing? Some moments I forget how.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. I often, I often found myself like gasping because I couldn't breathe and my breathing was really shallow. And I have this bracelet that I have been wearing since 2007 that a girlfriend of mine gave to me, and it says "breathe." You might not be able to, and I wear it every day. I have been wearing it every day for 15 years. And sometimes just holding it reminds me to inhale. And that is one of the things, that was my mantra: inhale, exhale, repeat as necessary.
Yeah.
And you don't have to get through the whole day. You can just get through one breath at a time, and then you will get through the whole day. But yeah, breathing, sleeping, and eating was sort of my holy trinity at the very beginning, and sometimes even now, right? Like when a kid graduates from college or something super awesome and daddy isn't there.
Right. Yeah.
It's the worst.
Yeah. 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 Go ahead.
Inhale. Remember to eat. Be gentle.
Yeah. You talk, and it's like I can't see if I can finish the sentence. Like this book has to get published, and I don't know how, because it just is like, because part of it also is it's honest and it's beautiful and it's powerful, and you'll go through 4 boxes of that reading it. And there's also times where I was laughing, and it talks, and so you really sort of get into sort of that healing power in it. But the other thing, some of the language you use is so beautiful. Like one of the things you wrote, you said, grief time has a cadence all its own, and healing did not travel in a straight line. And I think there's something about our own discomfort with people's grief, especially about something that makes us so uncomfortable like suicide, that there can almost be sort of this expectation of, okay, well, after a year you're going to be over it, right? Yeah, and so because we don't want to deal with it anymore. And then you read a friend who lost her teenage son to suicide warned me that the second year was worse than the first. Everybody thinks you're over it, that you've survived the hardest year of your life, and now you're okay, but the truth is it still hurts, sometimes more than ever. And I think about this person who texted in, it's been more than a year, and then you can sort of think, well, is something wrong with me that I'm not over it yet? And so can you talk, and then you say, yeah, you still wear this, and this is still there, it's 15 years. Can you talk a little about that?
Well, I just want to hold that person who texted in with their 38-year-old baby. It's an enormous, searing loss. Yeah. And I want to encourage them to take however long it takes. Yeah. We each have a different journey. And to trust yourself in that space, to take the time you need, to draw the boundaries you need, to open the doors when you need doors open. It is a journey. I don't know if you're familiar with William Worden's 4 tasks of mourning. No. The first task of mourning is to accept the reality of the loss. That's the biggest step when you say the S word out loud, right, is accepting that reality. The second task is to experience the pain of that grief. I often took my grief running. I was never a runner before. Yeah. And running was very helpful for me just to pound out that grief and anger and all the feelings, even just to feel myself again, to get past the numbness, right, of how heavy the grief is. The third task is to adjust to life without that loved one, and whatever changes that means that you need to make in your physical, spiritual, emotional life. And the fourth task is about integration, about integrating that loss into who you are, where you have been, and to continue to move forward. Right. Because even though it feels like my life is over when my husband dies, my life isn't over. Mm-hmm. And I get to live my life. And that is not selfish, right. And that is not unkind. Mm-hmm. It is my life to live. And I believe that I honor Sam more by living my life well. I do believe that is what he would have wanted. Mm-hmm. It is not that simple. Mm-mm. It's taken 15 years to get to where I am now, and I'm not done yet.
Right.
So just staying on that journey and trusting it to be okay. Yeah. And it won't be easy, but you don't have to go it alone. And, if your conception of God isn't working for you, try a new one.
Try a new one. Amen. Someone else texts in, how have your boys coped with their grief over the years?
Lots of different ways. Children re-grieve at each developmental stage, and the children's griefs are different from each other. And so that's one of the challenges as a grieving parent, to help each child grieve in the way that is unique to them. And as you know, and lots of people here know, I did remarry to a man who had also 2 sons and who had also lost his life partner to cancer, not suicide. And so when we got married, now I had 4 grieving children. So I didn't stop therapy for a long time. Yeah. Each child grieves in their own way. And so my job as a parent was to try as best I could in my own imperfect ways to be a container for them. Mm-hmm. And it changes. So the 6-year-old grieves differently than that same child grieves at 12 and at 18. There are healthier ways to grieve than not. There are no right answers necessarily, but there are a few wrong ones. Yeah. And so trying to help the kids find their own path in this. Mm-hmm. And then the hardest part as a parent is really handing the reins to them and trusting them to move forward in a way that is healthy for them. Right. But this is not unique to grieving parents and grieving children. All parents and children struggle with this. But for me, it was about finding balance, how much to push them. Do you make them go to school? Do you not make them go to school? Do they not go to school for months? I mean, you know your kid. You have to navigate that together.
But having to do that while you're doing your own grief.
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah. This person writes, I have struggled with suicidal thoughts and depression for more than 3 years. The details are unimportant at the moment, but I've been struggling with faith and God and meaning at the same time. I'm not religious, but I have found more comfort and assistance in the Christian friends I have. I hope you understand that their expression of their relationship with God extends to their relationship with me, and it has helped. Thank you so much for that. And I hope you are reaching out to as many people as possible for help if you're having suicidal thoughts. Again, we gave you those. That number, the National Suicide Hotline, is 800-273-8255. And certainly, if you want to just sit with someone and talk about both your thoughts of suicide and also your search for meaning and your wrestling with God, that's what we're here for at All Saints Church. So would love to sit with any of you and have that conversation just whenever. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. So we have just a couple minutes left. I wanted to, and I know you have a blessing for us as we close. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I love, and you sort of talk about things like sort of how you got through, that I loved, you had this ritual of a bowl of water. Can you sort of talk about that? Because it just sort of seemed like, apart from suicide and being a survivor, just like, wow, that's a great sort of way to live. So I just want to sort of talk about that because just felt so life-giving.
I first read about this practice in a book called My Grandfather's Blessings by Rachel Naomi Remen.
Okay.
And she begins and she learned it from Tibetan nuns, and
Okay.
she begins each day filling a bowl. You're supposed to do it from, a running stream or something, but I do it at the kitchen sink.
Yep.
And as the bowl fills, you think about the whole range of your life, the things you're excited about, you're happy about, you're grateful for, the things you're struggling with, your health struggles, your struggles with your own parents or everything. And you just, as the bowl fills, accept the whole of your life. And then you put it on an altar of sorts. I put mine on the kitchen counter. And especially with 4 young kids and who are now 4 adult kids, I spent a lot of time in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So I saw it a lot. And as you pass it and think about it, it's just a reminder to use everything that you have, not just the gifts, but also the challenges, to use all of it in the service of your life. And then at the end of the day, to release the water down the drain. My kids called it dumping mommy's worries down the drain. So at the end of the day, just letting go and trusting. It is a very hard exercise to trust when life has disappointed you in the most horrific and grievous ways. And this was a practice I had started before Sam's death, and it was really very life-giving to continue to practice this as we were grieving his death, but to let go and to trust. And it's not easy to trust when all of the supports feel like they have dropped out, but they actually haven't dropped out. There are supports there that you didn't know, maybe, that I didn't know. And once you've dumped the worries and put the bowl upside down on the counter, it's time to rest. And that has been it's a very simple practice, but it has changed my life.
Thank you. I think one of the things that makes this conversation so powerful and important is, I think what I hope is after the last 2 years, we can finally just sort of dispense with, I hope we're getting close to the lie that everyone isn't struggling, that we're all struggling. I mean, the truth is we are all struggling. And, some of us get better at hiding it than others. And I think one of the things that I've found is this pandemic has just sort of broken down my ability to pretend that I'm not struggling, because I'm just I'm just tired. And you found this wonderful blessing. I have a cut. Do you?
Oh,
You've got your
blessing, yeah.
So would you bless us with this? Really, it's a beatitude about sort of blessing when you realize everyone is struggling. Would you close us out with that?
I would. Thanks again for having this conversation.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
I hope and pray that it reaches the ears for whom it will help.
Well, and this isn't a one and done. We're going to be, we're going to keep talking.
You know where to find me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kate Bowler posted this blessing from her upcoming book, Good Enough, 40-ish devotionals for a life of imperfection. And it is called A Blessing When You Realize Everyone is Struggling. Blessed are you who have realized that life is hard, and it's hard for everyone. Your awareness came at a cost. You lost something you can't get back. You were diagnosed with chronic pain or a degenerative disease. Your family fell apart, and things have never been the same. Blessed are you who gave up the myth that the good life is one of happiness, success, perfection. The life that looks beautiful on Facebook but isn't real. You who realize it is okay to not be okay. to not have a shiny life because no one does. Blessed are you who see things clearly, where struggle is everyone's normal. You walk among the fellowship of the afflicted, a club no one wants to join. And while this life isn't shiny, it does come with superpowers. Superpowers of ever-widening empathy and existential courage that get you back up after another fall. And a deepened awe at the beauty and love that can be found amid life's rubble. Like flowers that grow from the cracks in the sidewalk, these virtues blossom in you, and thank God for you. Blessed are all of us who struggle, for we are in good company and will never walk alone.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte Maya. To read more from Charlotte, go to her website, charlotte-maya.com. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all for joining us. And again, we're going to post those numbers for resources on the website. So blessings to you. We'll be back in just a few minutes for the 11:30 service.